Hi everyone! Welcome to the second episode of my Stretch Your Stamps scrapbooking video series. This month I am so happy to be joined by my crafty friends Heba Alsabai from My Little Journal, Ronelia Motroni, aka Ronelia Creative on Instagram, and Sabrina Poole, who is Mrs. Scrappin' Plan on Instagram, and we are going to be sharing our favorite ways to use floral stamps. Before I get started with this month's video, I just wanted to thank everyone who shared their projects on Instagram using the hashtag SYS scrapbooking over the last month. I really enjoyed seeing you all get inspired to pull out those stamp sets from your stash. Crystal was one of my guest contributors last month, and she shared 2 spreads using solid stamps. The first was featuring the Ali Edwards December Daily Triangle and Tree stamp set to make the rays for the sun in this layout, and I love how she stretched this traditionally winter-themed stamp set to document some bright sunny days. Crystal's second layout featured the Ali Edwards Circle and Half Circle stamp set, and I love how she layered some of these stamps together to create these journaling spots for her spread. Jennifer was my other guest contributor last month, and she shared this gorgeous spread featuring the Ali Edwards Bloom Story stamp set, and I love the tips she shared in her video about using Distress Oxide inks for solid stamps. If you missed either of those videos, make sure you check out my Stretch Your Stamps scrapbooking playlist here on YouTube. I've added all of my videos as well as my guest contributors' videos, so they're a bit easier to find. And here are some more stamping inspiration posts that were shared on Instagram this month. Kate shared this lovely spread featuring some stamps from Studio Calico and Ali Edwards, and I love how she mixed the stamps together to frame her photos on this layout. Tiffany shared this gorgeous spread featuring some Ali Edwards story stamp sets, and I love how she used the solid Speech Bubbles stamps to highlight bits of her journaling. This next one is from me. I was using the Paper Person Local Brew stamp set when I realized that by not priming the solid liquid stamp to fill in the beer glasses, I got this cool bubbly effect that makes it look like my beer is carbonated. So there's a place and a time for not priming your stamps. Ronelia shared this beautiful layout that she created by layering a solid heart stamp from Studio Calico with some other stamps from Ali Edwards, and she even filmed a process video for that, so I'll leave a link down in the description box below for you to check that out. And the last one is also from me. I just wanted to share how I like to use this solid swatch looking stamp from My Favorite Things to create my ink swatches. Just a reminder that if you're sharing some layouts inspired by our stamping videos, feel free to use the hashtag SYS scrapbooking, and I'll pick out a few to feature in next month's video. So for this month's video, I'm going to be sharing a few different ways for how I like to use floral stamps, with some layering floral stamp sets from Altenew and some large outline floral stamp sets from Carrie Bradford. And Heba, Ronelia, and Sabrina will each have their own video showing how they like to use floral stamps, so make sure to check those out after this video. For my first spread, I'm going to be using 3 stamp sets from Altenew, although you certainly don't need all 3 stamp sets, and I'll be talking more about that later. First off, I'm going to choose a color palette that will go with these photos of our trip to the Saskatoon Berry Farm. And for that, I'm using a free app on my phone called Coolors, that's Coolors. And this app allows you to upload a photo, and the app will generate a color palette from that photo. So here you'll see a screenshot from my phone using the app, and I really like the lavender and plum colors that it picked out from the berries, as well as the muted greens that it picked out from the leaves. So I'm going into my binder of ink swatches and taking a look at all of the Altenew mini ink cubes that I have. So these dye inks from Altenew come in sets of 4 mini ink cubes from the same color family, going from the lightest to the darkest. And you'll see that in this binder, I've swatched all 4 of the inks just on their own, as well as what they look like when they're all layered together, so it makes it really easy for me to pick out coordinating colors for my layering stamps. And for the purples, I've picked out Pale Mauve, Amethyst, Grape Agate, and Plum. And then for the greens, I've picked out Free Leaf, Forest Glades, and Evergreen. Next, I'm going to talk a bit about the stamp sets that I'm using, and these are Beautiful Day, Remember This, and Coral Charm from Altenew. And in all of these stamp sets, there are stamps that are designed to be layered together with different inks to give some shadowing and detail to the flowers without having to go in and color these images with like Copic markers or pencil crayons. And the reason why I have all 3 of these stamp sets is because they all feature the same types of flowers. I think these are peonies. And I like having a variety of different sizes and orientations of the same type of flower on my layout to make it look a bit more cohesive. But if you look closely at some of these stamp sets, you'll notice that some of the flowers are quite similar to one another. So like this flower in the Remember This stamp set is a smaller version of the one in the Coral Charm stamp set. And you'll notice that some of the non-layering clusters of flowers are similar between these 2 stamp sets as well. Ultimately, if you're just going to buy one of these 3 stamp sets, I would personally choose the Remember This stamp set because it has a variety of different types of leaves and flowers in this one stamp set alone. And also, if you're looking for another different type of flower specifically, Altenew literally has hundreds of different flower stamp sets available in their shop, so make sure you check those out as well. And for some of these, I do have the product inspiration brochure that came with these stamp sets, as well as some of the metal dies to cut out the flowers. Next, I'm going to share some tips and tricks for using these layering stamps. If you've never used multi-layering stamps before, these could look a bit intimidating, but the Altenew website has layering guides for how to line these images up, and with practice, it does get easier to see how they line up. Just know that even with a lot of experience using layered stamps, I am still occasionally referring to the layering guide for these stamp sets. It's just off screen on my laptop, but these are quite easy to use once you get the hang of it. When I'm using layering stamps, I like to start out with the outline image, and I like to stamp that in my darkest shade of color first. So here you'll see I'm stamping this down with the plum color. Next, I like to layer the solid base layer with the lightest color, and this is usually the easiest of the images to line up because it just fills the entire flower. So here I'm just stamping that down with the pale mauve color. The nice thing to know about this solid stamp is that you don't have to worry too much if it doesn't stamp perfectly, like if it's a bit blotchy, because some of it is going to get covered up by the second and third layers. And after you have that much detail, it's kind of hard to tell where you don't stamp properly. After that, I'm using the second layer stamp and stamping this with my second lightest color. You can tell that it's the second layer stamp because it does provide some detail, but it isn't quite as sparse as the third layer stamp. So here I'm stamping this down with the amethyst color, and you can see how it lines up in certain spots with the outline of the image. And lastly, I'm stamping the third layer stamp, which is the most sparse in detail, with my third lightest color, which is the grape agate color. This one I'd say is usually the hardest one to line up, and I usually have to refer to the layering guide to see where it lines up on the stamp. In general, I do like to use dye inks as opposed to hybrid inks or pigment inks to stamp my layering stamps, just because I find that the translucency allows some of the original color to kind of layer together and show through, and so it creates a bit more of a seamless layered effect as opposed to using pigment inks, which just lie on top of each other. Just remember that if you are using dye inks, it does take a while for it to kind of absorb into the paper and even out. So don't worry if initially when you stamp it, it looks a bit splotchy. As you're layering it, it will look a bit nicer. So here you'll see I'm just stamping out my leaf image, and that is a layered stamp image as well. And these layered images do take some time to stamp out because you have to stamp them down, you have to line them up, and there's a multi-step process for each of these stamps. So next, I'm going to be sharing a trick for how I like to use my stamping platform to save a bit of time when I'm stamping lots of these images. Here I have my Tim Holtz stamping platform, which I believe has been discontinued, but you can buy a MISTI and that would work just as well. And I'm cutting down my paper to size so that it can fit into the stamp platform. I'm using the smaller of the stamp sets here. This is the Remember This stamp set. And you'll see that I've pulled a bunch of outline stamps for the layering images of this stamp set and just stuck them onto the corner of my stamping platform. Because a few of these images contain both the flower part as well as the leafy part, I'm going to stamp the outlines for those in black ink instead of the usual dark green that I've been using for the leaves or the dark purple that I've been using for the flowers. So you'll see I stamped the outline of the flower in the dark purple and the other outlines in just a black ink. Next, I'm going to leave the stamps where they are on the stamping platform and rotate my white cardstock 90 degrees in the stamp platform, making sure to have it lined up on the bottom left corner. Just inking up the stamps with the same inks that I had used previously. And you can see that I can stamp this down on to that bottom corner of the cardstock. So after I rotate this another 2 times, I'll have 4 sets of the same images on my white piece of cardstock. And you can for sure go ahead and cut out more white cardstock and stamp out even more images if you like. And you can also alternate the inks and use different color schemes if you like. Just make sure that you wipe off the leftover ink that's on these stamps and make sure that the stamps don't move when you're cleaning them off. But for the purposes of this video, I'm satisfied with just the 4 sets of images, so I'm going to remove these outline stamps and move on to the solid stamps. So I'm just carefully lining up each of these solid stamps in each of these outlines. For the images that have both the leaves and the flowers, I'm going to work on filling in the flowers first with the solid stamps, then I'll do the solid parts of the leaves later. So for each of these solid stamps, I'm just carefully placing them face down onto my outline image. And then later I'll be picking this up with the door of the stamp platform, and they'll all be in the correct places. So you can see that even though I have to take a bit of time to line up these 3 solid stamps, I only have to do that once, and then I can stamp and rotate until all 4 sets of images are complete. And if you're going to be doing a lot of stamping, that saves you a lot of time. Just make sure that each time you rotate your white cardstock, make sure that your paper is lined up on the bottom left corner of the stamp platform before you do your stamping, and your images should line up perfectly each time. I'll also add that even if you don't get your images completely lined up, no one will be able to tell. The art on these flowers are kind of like loose sketches, so even if they're not perfectly lined up, they look great. And even though this takes a bit of time to do, I love the results that this gives. The flowers are so detailed and you get so much dimension from layering these stamps. And I love being able to customize the colors in these floral embellishments to be able to match any of the photos or pattern papers that I have. So here you can see my finished set of flower images, and I think they just look so pretty. You can even use this as like a pattern paper if you wanted and not cut these out. But I am going to share a trick for die cutting these images out if you happen to have a die cutting machine. First off, I'm cutting this cardstock down into 4 sections, each with the same 3 images that I've stamped out using my stamping platform. This makes this cardstock easier to fit into your die cutting machine as well. Next, I'm taking the corresponding dies for each of these images and lining them up, then taping them down with some low-tack tape. This could be washi tape if you have some on hand. I'm just using the iCraft removable purple tape here. And I'm just making sure that I have enough tape that the dies are stuck down to this piece of white cardstock. After I run this through my die cutting machine, I'm just going to pop out the die cut images, but keep the dies in place on my white cardstock using the tape. Since these images are in the exact same place relative to each other as my last set of images, I can use the windows that these dies created to line up the dies with my second set of images, and that way I'm lining up all 3 dies together instead of having to line them up individually each time, and that saves me so much time as well. So I'm just repeating the same steps until all of my flowers have been cut out, and next we're actually going to work on starting to put together this spread. My idea for this page is to create a trifold with a window that opens to this photo of my boyfriend on the back page, and I'm going to decorate with these stamped floral embellishments around each of those windows to create a layered effect. So I'm starting out with a piece of white cardstock that measures 5 inches wide by 8 3/8 of an inch tall, and that's the same size as a Citrus Twist Life Crafted album page protector. And I have 2 pieces of white cardstock that measure 4 3/4 of an inch wide by 8 3/8 of an inch tall. So to these narrower pieces, I'm scoring on one side at 1/2 inch and then applying some 3/8 inch score tape to create the hinges for my trifold. Next up, I'm going to be using these oval dies from My Favorite Things to create the windows, and I want the first window in the front to be slightly larger than the back window to create a layered effect. To do that, I'm cutting out my smaller window first onto the center of one of these flaps, then tracing that window onto the other flap so that I can use it to center my larger oval die so that it has an even spacing around the smaller window. And you can see that once I'm done and I layered these two pieces together, you can see through the larger window to the smaller window, and then through the smaller window you can then see my photo. So here I'm just removing the tape backing from my two flaps and then sticking them down on either side of my base page, making sure that the windows are still nice and lined up in the center. And you'll notice that I've already punched some holes in the side of this base page to make sure that I can still stick it into my album once I'm done. Next, I'm just trimming down my photo so that it'll fit in the middle of these two flaps on my base page. And I'm also marking down where this photo is going to lie on my page so that the picture of my boyfriend is going to be centered and you can see my boyfriend through the windows of these flaps. To go along with the purple flowers that I had created with my stamps, I'm going to use some pattern papers from the Cocoa Daisies Wisteria Lane collection. This was released for July 2021, and I picked out one of these light lavender pattern papers to go behind my photo on the back page. So just trimming my pattern paper down to size here, and then adhering everything together with my Tombow Mono permanent adhesive tape runner. Next up, I'm going to be working on layering these stamped flowers and just arranging them into clusters around these windows. I'll have a group of flowers on the front window and then another group of flowers on the back window, so it'll kind of create a layered effect when this trifold page is closed. For each of the clusters, I made sure to include a couple of different flowers and leaves. And once I was happy with the results, I just stuck the clusters together with some low-tack tape, just temporarily. And it took me a while to figure out how I wanted to put adhesive onto the backs of these florals to stick them onto my page, because I didn't want to put adhesive all over the backs of the flowers, because then they would stick to the bottom layers of this trifold once they closed. So I finally figured out this system where I would flip the window open with the floral cluster into place, and then I would trace the edge of the window, and then when I applied my adhesive tape runner, I just made sure not to apply any adhesive beyond that pencil line that I had traced. And then I did have to go back after I had stuck them down just to apply a bit more adhesive onto some of those flower pieces to stick them onto each other. The lighting in my video went really strange at a couple of points, so I did have to cut out parts of the video, but I think you get a gist of what I'm doing here. If you have any questions, you can always feel free to let me know as well. Once I have all my floral clusters into place, I'm going to work on these smaller photos that will go on the bottoms of these trifold pages. I'm using the oval dies again to cut them into oval shapes, and I just stuck two of the oval dies together using that low-tack tape to create some oval shaped frames out of some more of that pattern paper from Cocoa Daisy. And then I'm going to layer these frames on top of the oval shaped photos and adhere them into place on the bottoms of my pages. After that, I did some journaling on some clear sticker paper and stuck that down to a journaling card from Cocoa Daisy's Modern Memory Keeping Kit. And I cut that in two pieces so that the top piece could go below my photo and the bottom piece could go above my photo, and that's where I included the date stamp. To finish off this spread, I just took some time to use some of the adhesive-backed die-cut pieces from Cocoa Daisy's kit to decorate the backs of the flowers that were peeking out from behind the windows. And I also scattered some glitter enamel dots from Cocoa Daisy onto the very front of this trifold as well. My next spread features some large and bold outline floral images from Carrie Bradford, and these stamp sets are called Big Blooms and Coming Up Roses. One of my favorite ways to use these types of floral stamps is to use them with heat embossing on vellum. I'm going to be using the largest flower on these stamp sets to create a pocket for my story album layout. So I have a piece of vellum measuring 4.5 inches tall by 7 inches wide, and I'm going to score at the 1/2 inch mark on 3 of the 4 sides to create a pocket. Now, I don't have a stamping block large enough for this large flower stamp. It measures approximately 5 inches by 5 inches, so I'm going to be using my stamping platform again. So here I'm just positioning the largest flower onto my pocket, making sure I get as much of that flower as possible onto my vellum piece. And I'm also using another one of these flowers to fill up that empty space on the right side of the pocket. My first tip for doing heat embossing is to use an anti-static powder tool to remove any excess moisture or oils on your surface before you do any stamping. I find that if I don't do that, then I get stray embossing powder patches everywhere I've touched the page with my greasy fingers. So I'm doing that first. Here I'm just using my Versamark ink pad to stamp these flowers onto my vellum piece. If you've never used Versamark before, it's like a sticky transparent ink, so this is what's going to allow the embossing powder to stick onto your vellum paper. You can see how it's nice and shiny when I tilt this up in the light. Next, I'm just sprinkling on some of my favorite white embossing powder. This is the opaque, bright white regular embossing powder from WOW. And then I'm just going to tap the back of the vellum very gently to get rid of any excess embossing powders that might be stuck on my page. My next tip for heat embossing, especially on vellum, is to make sure that your heat gun gets nice and hot before you start heating up your embossing powder. And the reason why is because vellum has kind of like a plasticky material, so if you heat up any particular spot on your vellum for too long, it'll actually start to melt and it'll warp a bit. So you'll notice that I'm waving my heat gun around in a circular motion around the vellum piece just to make sure that it doesn't get too hot in any one spot. So you'd be able to see this better in real life, but you'll notice that the heat embossing is done when all the embossing powder is evenly melted and nice and shiny, as opposed to being powdery like it was at the beginning. I'm going to repeat those same steps to emboss that second flower onto my pocket, and then I'm going to use some of the smaller flowers to create some vellum embellishments. And you'll see that even though I'm using flower stamps to create embellishments again, these flowers look so much different from the flowers that I created with the colored inks on white cardstock with the Altenew stamps for my previous spread. I find that the vellum gives the floral stamps such a light, airy, and delicate feel, and these would look really pretty if you use silver or gold embossing powder as opposed to the white embossing powder as well. One more tip for using embossing powders is to make sure you have some sort of tray with a funnel that you can use to collect all the excess embossing powders and then pour them back into your container. I'm using a Recollections embossing tray that I got from Michaels ages ago, but I've seen people use coffee filters as well if you have those lying around. And after I finish my embossing, I like to use one of these Swiffer duster cloths to clean off any stray embossing powders that might have fallen onto my desk. So once my cleanup was done, I decided to trim around the top edges of my flowers on this vellum pocket piece to form the top of my vellum pocket. And when I fold down on these 3 score marks, I have this pretty looking pocket with the floral edge on the top. I decided to use craft cardstock as the base of my pages to help the vellum flowers stand out a bit more. So I've cut down 2 pieces of cardstock to 7 inches by 8¼ inch, which is the same size as a story album page protector. And I also fussy cut out the rest of my vellum flower pieces, and now I'm going to start assembling my page. This story was one that was very hard for me to tell. It's about a former teacher of mine from junior high who I very much respected and who had influenced my life. And he sadly passed away several years ago. And by the time I thought about reconnecting with him at the start of the pandemic last year, it was too late at the time. And the journaling that I have is a letter that I'm writing to him with that perspective in mind. So I'm not going to be reading the letter in this video, but I will post a picture of it towards the end if you are interested in reading it. So you might have noticed that I had 2 photos from junior high. I scanned those and reprinted them from my printer, and I have some pieces from Ali Edwards' Friends story kit that I'm going to use to support the telling of this story. And I just kind of laid it out on my page to see what it would look like. And And I decided I wanted to accent the white that was in the vellum flowers. So I'm just taking some white distress paint and making some ink splatters onto my page. This is using the Tim Holtz Distress Splatter tool. At first, the splatters were coming out a bit too fine, so I did have to dilute the paint a bit with some water, and then I was more satisfied with the splatters after that. For the page on the right, I mostly concentrated the splatters towards the middle of the page, where it's not going to be covered by the 4x6 pocket card and the vellum pocket. And for the page on the left, I did my splatters on the top right corner as well as the bottom left corner, where I'm going to be placing the majority of my vellum flowers. While I was waiting for my paint to dry off, I used this alphabet stamp from Hero Arts. This is the typewriter alphabet stamp to stamp out my title onto this card from the Friends Story Kit. And after that, I just used some score tape to adhere my vellum pocket to the bottom of this page. I did adhere the very bottom seam of the pocket to the back of the base page, so that's just one less seam that's visible from the front of the page. And the letter that I've typed out is going to live in there. For the left side of this spread, I arranged the vellum flowers around my two photos. And once I was happy with the way they sat on the page, I just adhered them down to the backs of my photos. And then I lifted them up to apply some more adhesive onto the backs of the vellum flowers, just to where the sections would be covered by the photos so that you couldn't see any of the adhesive through the vellum. I did have to use a tiny bit of tape runner just on that center flower there that bridges the two photos, but beneath all the heat embossing you can't really see where I had applied the adhesive. I did add a couple more pieces from the Friends Story Kit to help decorate this page a bit, and that finishes up my layout. Here are some photos of my completed page, and I hope this inspires you to start using some of those floral stamps you might have. I would love to see what you create with floral stamps as well, so if you decide to try any of the techniques shown in this video or any of the techniques in Heba or Ronelia or Sabrina's videos, or if you have a favorite way to use floral stamps of your own that you would like to share with us, I would love for you to post your projects on Instagram and make sure to tag us using the hashtag #SYSScrapbooking. And if you have a particular type of stamp that you'd like to see featured in a future video, feel free to let me know and I'll add that to my list of future stamp categories. I'm also always on the hunt for new guest collaborators, so if you like using stamps in your scrapbook pages and would be interested in sharing a process video for a future month, feel free to get in touch. My Stretch Your Stamps scrapbooking videos will be posted on the second Saturday of every month, so make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel to get notified when those are uploaded. And check back every month for new techniques featuring different types of stamps with different guest collaborators. Thanks so much for watching and happy stamping!